Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Society for Clinical Neuropsychology's Ethnic Minority Affairs Subcommittee to our webinar today titled A Conversation with an Ally. What can we learn? Before we get started, I'd like to go over kind of a rough outline of what will be happening today so you know what to expect. We'll have an introduction of the speakers. I know this is a little bit out of order. Introduction to members of the subcommittee. We'll discuss some rules that are really important when talking about difficult dialogues and difficult information that can be sensitive for us. So we want to make sure that we have some ground rules so that everyone is being treated with respect. And that'll be included in our introduction. And we'll mention a few important terms for vocabulary so that we are all working from the same page. After that, what we'll do is we will open up the video for you to watch, which is our conversation with an ally. And we'll close out today with a discussion about our thoughts and things that we noticed that are that had occurred during the conversation. So we hope that you feel that this is a safe place to be able to talk about a lot of different things and the importance of having allies for people of color in the field of neuropsychology. So before we get started, I wanted to thank everyone on the committee. So this is all of the committee members, including myself, are all shown here. And I'll introduce myself in just a moment. But I first wanted to recognize all of the hard work that every single person who participates on and serves on the Ethnic Minority Affairs Committee. They put a lot of hard work and time into the development of this particular webinar, along with all of the things that we do in EMA. So I want to just make sure that we take the time to acknowledge everyone. Everyone's names and locations and jobs are all listed on the PIAC or Public Interest Advisory Committee / Ethnic Minority Affairs website, which can be found on the Society for Clinical Neuropsychology website. If you have any questions about participating in any EMA activities throughout the year or like any information regarding what we do in addition to the webinars, please feel free to reach out to anyone you see here and to my contact information that is posted on our website. All right, so introductions. So my name is Dr. Michelle Medor, and I'm a clinical neuropsychologist here at VA Palo Alto in the MIREC. I am the director for the National Clinical RTMS program. I'm also the co-director of our Sierra Pacific MIREC Advanced Postdoctoral Fellowship. I received my doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the University of Cincinnati, where I received specialized training in neuropsychology. I was an intern here at VA Palo Alto Healthcare System and completed my postdoctoral training focused in clinical neuropsychology and neurorehabilitation research at VA Martinez, the San Francisco VA Medical Center, and again here at VA Palo Alto. I serve as the current chair of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Subcommittee, and I also serve as the financial officer for the Asian American Psychological Association's Division on Filipino Americans. At the conclusion of our webinar, for the discussion portion, the discussion will be led by Dr. Tish McDonald. Dr. McDonald is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of New Mexico's Health Sciences Center. She received her undergraduate degree at Harvard University and her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the University of Denver, with specialties in neuropsychology, multicultural awareness, and statistics. She completed both her internship and postdoctoral training in clinical neuropsychology at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. She has founded the Multicultural Excellence in Neuropsychology Training and Evaluation program at UNM Hospital, and it's a center dedicated to providing clinical training, research, and service delivery to linguistic minorities, which includes an outreach program to San Felipe Pueblo. She is an invited faculty member of the master's program in neuropsychology at the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. Dr. McDonald focuses her research on how to better understand the impact that different factors, for example, socioeconomic status, language, and culture, have on neurodevelopment and how it informs culturally competent neuropsychological practices. She serves on several different boards and initiatives, including the Hispanic Neuropsychological Society and the American Psychological Association's Society for Clinical Neuropsychologists, PIAC or EMA subcommittee. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about what to expect today. It's important to note that individuals from underrepresented minority groups often experience discomfort when having conversations about topics that involve identity and intersectionality when discussing these things with other individuals who may have dissimilar backgrounds, particularly if we're talking to individuals who come from advantaged social groups or from a particular level of privilege that someone from a marginalized community might not experience or have. Social justice allies often serve as social support in these circumstances or when we have these discussions, and they help us to stand against oppression, work to eliminate oppressive attitudes and beliefs in themselves and their communities, and they work hard to understand their privilege. So, our webinar today contrasts the experiences between people of color and social justice allies. And we also hope to focus on what can be learned when we start to have these different types of open conversations. So, we want to set some useful dialogue guidelines for when we get to the end of the webinar, but it's important to talk about them up front. So, we want to make sure that not one or two persons are dominating the discussion. We want to allow the opportunity for everyone to get the chance to express themselves. We want to be mindful of trying not to interrupt, and let's try to avoid monologues. So, keeping our comments to one or two sentences that are succinct so that other people have the opportunity to express themselves. Also, we want to be respectful of differing opinions. So, we want to try and respect and listen to what one another says with an open mind. We are not here to convince or anyone to adopt our specific positions. We also want to acknowledge that disagreement is okay and that our goal is not to have a consensus on a certain topic um, or point, but really to provide that all different perspectives are valued. We want to encourage that everyone to participate, and even if you choose not to participate or ask a question, that's okay too. We also want to point out that the designated monitor, which is Dr. McDonald in this point, is acting as a facilitator and not necessarily a participant to the conversation. And so she will help guide us and answer some of the questions that people in the audience may have today. The last thing I'd like to point out regarding some of these useful guidelines is that sometimes our best thinking or best thoughts on a particular topic comes to us after reflection. I know oftentimes in training, we learn that we have to be okay with sitting in the silence. And that silence that we're sitting in gives us the opportunity to really think through what we may have experienced or listened and heard, and gives us that time to process. The more complex something is, which we know as neuropsychologists, the more attention is required and time in processing that information and or experience. And so we want to be mindful that some things take some time for reflection. So, in order to facilitate our discussion for after we watch the video, we wanted to provide you with some information. The words that we use to discuss things, the words that we choose when we're having conversations, is very important. And so, research and practice helps us to advance things and has a specific terminology. So, we just wanted to throw out a couple of up to date terms, if you will, so that we are showing each other respect and trying to use the most appropriate language as possible. Um, we know that change is hard, and it's really hard to always keep up to date with some of these terms. And we may make mistakes as we're interacting with one another, and that's okay. It's okay to make a mistake. It's just important that we are gracious with one another and provide each other with gentle corrective feedback rather than being attacking of one another. One important term that we really want to point out is the term intersectionality. So, intersectionality is a framework for understanding an individual or individual's experience, for example, discrimination or disadvantages, by accounting for overlapping identities such as race, class, gender, sexual orientation, religion, which can create a complex convergence of oppression because they have these multiple intersecting identities. In psychology, this can be conceptualized uh, as the effects of race, ethnicity, gender, social class, sexuality, etc., on outcomes such as health and well being, our personal and social identities, and can impact academic achievement. This framework can also be expanded to include other reasons why individuals face disadvantage and discrimination, such as able bodiedness, chronic medical condition, and any other variable that can affect the perception and experiences or opportunities of any other individual. Psychologists have included these categories in research and clinical practice for decades. For example, by the early 1980s, there were almost 200 publications exploring the relationship between socioeconomic status um, and academic achievement. However, only until more recently has our field explored how these variables interact to provide information regarding similar experiences, or conversely, interact to have a compounding effect on outcome. Race and socioeconomic status are independently associated with high academic achievement, but positively correlated but the positive correlation, between socioeconomic status and achievement is significantly less for some groups, for example, African American. The compounding effects of intersectionality on outcome can be best illustrated by studies on important variables such as income disparity, among many others. In the realm of income disparity, we have recognized that women of color experience more disadvantage than Caucasian women or men of color. So there are a variety of different variables to take into account and a variety of research articles and literature available. And these are often focused on the populations that we study. Less is available and less is discussed regarding how these demographic and intersecting identities impact our interactions with one another. And so we hope that the video today allows us a learning opportunity to demonstrate the importance of these interactions with one another. So before we begin the video, Who's in it? So first we have Dr. Clemente Vega. He is a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist in the Epilepsy Center at Boston Children's Hospital with, with clinical and academic efforts that focus on pediatric epilepsy syndromes, neurosurgical outcomes, and the cross-cultural application of neuropsychological assessment. He joined the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School after completing a postdoctoral fellowship with an epilepsy specialty as part of the Department of Neurosurgery at Yale University. He's also a consultant in criminal and civil litigation cases, as well as public school systems and professional sports teams in the Boston area. Another individual we have on the video is Dr. Lynette Silva Abrams. She obtained her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the University of New Mexico, where she engaged in graduate research in cerebellar functioning under the mentorship of Dr. Steve Verney and Ron Yale. She completed her pre-doctoral internship at the University of Chicago with Drs. Joseph Fink and Maureen Lacey before completing her postdoctoral training in neuropsychology with Dr. Neil Pliskin at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She was an assistant professor in psychiatry at the University of Texas Southwestern, as well as the director of assessment at Parkland Memorial Hospital for 3 years before returning to New Mexico. She's currently in private practice in Albuquerque, where she established a practicum for UNM's graduate students. She's currently licensed in the states of Illinois and New Mexico and will be available at the end of the video to answer questions, where Dr. McDonald will be facilitating our discussion. Our ally in our video is Dr. Monroe Cullum. He's a clinical neuropsychologist who specializes in assessment of cognitive disorders. He's board certified in clinical neuropsychology and directs the neuropsychology program at UT Southwestern. Dr. Cullum also serves as the chief of the Division of Psychology and the clinical core leader in the UTSW Alzheimer's Disease Center. He is a past president of the Society for Clinical Neuropsychology and the National Academy of Neuropsychology, and is actively involved in research, teaching, and clinical practice in neuropsychology. His research includes investigations into cognitive functioning in aging and dementia, neuropsychiatric syndromes, traumatic brain injury, and sports concussion. His lab is also involved in new cognitive test development and in telemedicine applications of neuropsychology. So before we play the video, some of you may be wondering, what is an ally? And we alluded to this at the beginning. An ally, or a social justice ally, is a person who is a member of an advantaged social group who takes a stand against oppression, works to eliminate oppressive attitudes and beliefs in themselves and their communities, and works to interrogate and understand their privilege and its impact on others. So without further ado, I would like to transition to our conversation with an ally.
Thank you, Michelle, and greetings, everyone, and thank you for participating in today's conversation. I am delighted to be here with you both. First question, what is your background and how has it shaped your experience in this field, if at all?
My relevant background starts about 500 years ago when my father's ancestors came to what would eventually be New Mexico. They were Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, and my family has been here ever since. As a group, we are known as the Conversos, or the Crypto Jews of New Mexico, a name that reflects the fact that they hid their ethnicity and religion under a veil of Catholicism, and then later on so much that they forgot that they had ever been Jewish to begin with. And that's what happened in my father's family. He did not find out about his heritage until he already had me and he was in his 40s. So as far as my parents knew, they both grew up as Mexican Americans in small Mexico. I'm the first person in my family since the Spanish Inquisition to identify as Jewish, and the first on either side to get a PhD. I grew up in New Mexico, which is a minority majority state, so I didn't really feel like a minority, and it didn't hurt that at the time I was growing up, a book came out about the crypto Jews of New Mexico, and so I felt like a valued member of the greater society that I was growing up in. And it's a little embarrassing to admit that I wasn't always aware of these inequalities or my own minority status. There were socioeconomic inequalities growing up, as you would see across the country anywhere, but most of us seemed to be mostly Hispanic and not quite middle class, so I didn't feel underrepresented in my community. I didn't really start to notice until I got to graduate school, actually. My old program, this was many years ago, it has improved a lot diversity-wise, but at the time, I found myself one of the only students of color and having to represent all peoples of the world everywhere, which I was not at all prepared to do. And I didn't have any way of articulating any sort of minority experience at that point. Unfortunately, I did not navigate those waters particularly gracefully. I've heard it said, and probably you have too, that being a minority in this country is sort of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's a fairly accurate way to describe much of my experience in my earlier education. I have lots of examples of being told that I am seeing some diversity issue that's not there, or I'm overreacting, or I need to grow a thicker skin. One comment in particular has stuck with me and impacts me maybe more today than it even did at the time. I was trying to explain to a fellow student why I was so anxious about a stats exam. And I mean, everybody's anxious about stats exams. If you told me to take a stats exam today, I would be very anxious. Only students others, and I didn't even know who these others might be, but definitely be used as an example as to why there were not more Hispanic students in my program. His response was, people don't think of you as Mexican, people think of you as Jewish. And at the time, I thought I knew what that might have meant, and maybe it was a somewhat misguided way of trying to be comforting or funny. And it took me about 5 years in grad school to be able to articulate any of this experience, even in the most basic way. And I'm very verbal, so this was very surprising to me that I had such trouble. And in combination with seeing very few people of my same background in this field that I love, has really led to me being involved in diversity and diversity issues, and in striving very hard to be an example to others similar background, and a resource for students and junior colleagues. I have to add, given the current time, that my experience, they're not set or clean or uncomplicated, and I'm sure that anyone's are. But there was a recent tragedy at the Pittsburgh synagogue in the last few days, and that's actually left me feeling kind of shaken when it comes to my identity. I feel very protective of me just now, and it made me think that I should probably mention this, because in our field that continues to value and promote diversity, we have to remember that ethnic and minority identities are not static. No one's really are. And our identities seem to be becoming more and not less experience.
So by way of my background, obviously I think we've all had many experiences that have shaped who we are and how we approach the field of psychology. I won't go quite as far back in history as Dr. Silva did. My father, though, was an immigrant from Scotland, eventually working on ships and worked his way up to become a ship's captain. He always had amazing stories of actual high drama on the high seas through wartime and beyond, which are always amazing. He was a leader that I got to learn from and admire. And his main encouragement of me was through academic success. That's the one thing he valued really above just about everything. My mother was the daughter of an Illinois farming family and was the most positive person I've ever known, even after surviving a bad left middle cerebral artery stroke that left her aphasic. She was eternally supportive, loving, and openly expressive of her pride in my accomplishments. So I obviously owe a tremendous amount to my parents. Growing up on the coast of Texas, I had friends of all backgrounds from a very early age. And actually, I never really paid attention to that because it was just part of the environment I was in. So my parents always treated everyone the same. They valued work. They valued good behavior. They valued treating others respectfully, regardless of their job or walk of life or background, appearance, etc. So that's the way I grew up, and I think I've basically carried that on. So I feel in some ways I was maybe, quote, blind to ethnic differences. And professionally, I've certainly been blessed with amazing role models throughout my undergraduate career and graduate internship and beyond, with amazing role models from very different backgrounds as well. Aaron Bigler, Nelson Butters, Ron Roof, Bob Heaton, to name a few. Through watching and observing, admiring their scholarship, their leadership, their dedication and involvement in the field, but as noted, all with very, very different personalities and different backgrounds. So I think I brought all of these experiences together with my own approach to life and psychology as well. Being a chief of the division of psychology, I work with a broad array of individuals from graduate students on up to senior faculty and higher leadership within the medical school. And I think I approach people in situations as pretty much I always have, although obviously we learn a lot with experience, and recent events in our culture certainly bring to light as perhaps never before, or I shouldn't say that, but certainly bring to light some of the issues and the divisiveness that we now face. And I think psychologists are in an important role to help others deal with that and to combat that as well.
Thank you both for sharing that. Our next question: have you ever had the experience of being a member of the opposite minority majority status than you are? And if not, what has been your experience as the field diversifies? What have you valued most from increased diversity?
I have had an experience of being part of the, perceived at least, as part of the majority. A long time ago, about 18 years ago, I had not found neuropsychology yet. I was not going to graduate school. I was working in a different industry, in a different field that had contracted services from a company in Greece. So I was lucky enough to get to go on a business trip with a colleague who was Korean American. She was my colleague and my friend, and it was almost like a vacation, but I wouldn't have told my employers that. We did get to go and see a lot of the Greek countryside, which was very beautiful, and we met a lot of the locals who were managing this business, who were all very friendly, very convinced that I was Greek. And I kept telling them I have absolutely no Greek in my history at all, and they kept boisterously disagreeing with me, saying absolutely somewhere in my background there was Greek. They were certain of this. And it was a very good time, and we spent about a week. And at the end of that week, we spent the evening in Athens before we were going to head back to the States. And I was going on and on, as I do, about how great the trip was and how beautiful Greece is and how nice the people are, and so on and so on. And my Korean American friend, long suffering, finally interrupted me and said, yes, it's very beautiful, but I don't feel like it's very welcoming. I feel like I've experienced a lot of racism in the past week. And I was shocked. I thought, I'm pretty sensitive to that kind of thing. And I told her I didn't experience any of what you're talking about. I was with you every second and I didn't see anything like that at all. And she looked at me like I was an idiot and said, of course you didn't see it. Everyone here thinks you're Greek. And my head exploded and I needed to go for a walk. So I went for a walk out in the streets of Athens that evening, and I don't know what the composition of Greece is currently, but about 18 years ago, it was 98% Greek, pretty homogenous. And not just Greek born, but Greek Orthodox in religion. And this is an overwhelming majority. And I realized walking around Athens that night that if I didn't say anything, people just assumed that I was supposed to be there, that I was Greek. I was one of them. I was Greek Orthodox. People nodded, were very friendly. I didn't have no one was suspicious that I didn't really belong there. And that had never happened to me before, not even in New Mexico, where there is a higher percentage of Hispanics and people who look like me. 98% Greek in an entire country, that was an overwhelming majority. And I try to keep that in mind. It was really the most valuable diversity experience that I've ever had. And it made me see that it's easy to not see what is happening right in front of you, and not for lack of trying and not for lack of sensitivity. This idea that I didn't see what was there. But now I try to keep it in mind every time I'm having a conversation with someone where I'm pointing out a diversity issue that they might not have noticed, because I know that it's not necessarily that they're not sensitive to it, not necessarily they're not looking for it, but sometimes you just can't see these things. I didn't.
So I have had the experience of being the minority within a majority. It really hasn't happened to me that often, quite honestly. I went to graduate school at UT Austin a few years ago. Lived in a neighborhood just south of the river there, and it was very, very mixed. You saw a little of everything every day. Mostly students, graduate students going to UT. Years and years later, I was back visiting Austin with my family, and we needed some things from the grocery store. So I went to the local grocery store that I used to shop at regularly when I was a graduate student there. And I got my stuff and got in line and just started kind of observing around me. And it dawned on me I was the only Caucasian person in the entire store, which was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. It did not concern me, but it was certainly one of those experiences. Is like, this is how it feels to be the only person that looks a certain way within a large crowd of people. And I've had a lot of experiences throughout my career that have made me value diversity. I mentioned, growing up in a diverse environment, and I think our field, it's a vital part of psychology that we expand diversity and embrace diversity. That's what our entire country is all about, is diversity. And it seems like we're just sort of now in the last few decades embracing this and realizing this, and many graduate programs are making efforts in this direction. But however, there are a lot of challenges to increasing diversity. But certainly, APA values this. It's in the reviews of all of our doctoral programs with which we're affiliated. and is high on everyone's list, and must be, because these are the clients we serve. These are the patients and the research subjects that we're studying to advance our science. And it is clearly the wave of the future. So I think I've benefited from a lot of my experiences and continue to grow and become aware. I've had faculty members point out examples to me that I'm not sure I was aware there was a diversity issue buried there, but I try to maintain a sensitivity to that. But I like I say, I sort of grew up relatively colorblind, I would say, which I think is a good thing, and was proud that my children grew up the same way.
Okay, thank you. One event can seem very different from these two perspectives, and for various reasons, we don't often get a chance to discuss these different perspectives with each other, particularly when it has had a positive impact on colleagues of minority status. Lynette, please share with us your successful diversity moment.
I have a successful diversity moment that I have experienced with Dr. Cullum. So this didn't happen directly to me, but it did impact me directly. This must have happened about 2.5 years ago, and I continue to bring it up. I had been working at UT Southwestern for a couple of years, and a new neuropsychologist, Dr. S, had been hired. At the time, I think he and I might have been the only two Hispanic neuropsychologists there. So we sort of bonded over that, and I tried to help him navigate that enormous system at UT Southwestern. And one day early on, he had told me he was in a meeting with other doctors and staff, and of course, Dr. Cullum. And several present apparently began questioning Dr. S's qualifications and training, suggesting perhaps he needed to be supervised, things of that nature. And as the story goes, Dr. Cullum said very plainly and firmly something like, "No, Dr. S, no one will be supervising you. We have confidence in your training and abilities." And that was the end of the discussion. Dr. S really appreciated Dr. Cullum's actions in that moment. And even though it didn't happen to me, I wasn't even present. In fact, as a minority member of that faculty, it meant a lot to me too. And Dr. S and I had several conversations about this moment over the next couple of weeks. And I found myself wondering why we kept talking about it, because it did seem to be at first such a minor and subtle moment, even if it was an encouraging one for diversity in our field. And it's a little difficult even now to express why this incident made such an impression on the two of us, but I suspect it has to do with an action in a moment by a leader in our field that is so opposite of what so many of us experience all the time, the opposite of being told that you're overreacting to something. Having someone in Dr. Cullum's position validate you, and in a fairly public forum, feels like our diversity, what we contribute to the field from our different backgrounds, is valued. And just as it feels terrible to be invalidated in seemingly subtle ways, it is an incredible relief to be validated in seemingly subtle ways. One of Dr. Cullum's most admirable qualities is that he's very modest. And so in thinking about this moment, I thought that his modesty would probably interfere with his ability to recognize this thing that he did. And he's a leader in the field, so he's leading a lot of people on a lot of fronts all of the time. And I was afraid that this moment might get lost because it has such potential. So I brought it up to him, and I brought it up again, and I've been bringing it up ever since, partially because as Dr. Cullum is a leader in our field, with a long list of accomplishments, and I'm afraid I'm going to embarrass him a little bit here, but if you haven't been to the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the last couple of years, his face is on a billboard, and he's standing next to Laura Lakritz. Both of them represent the field marvelously, so I can't think of two other people who should be on a billboard, but people see Dr. Cullum as this representation of neuropsychology all over town, and it's well-deserved. People look at him and want to be like him, junior colleagues, trainees, people who haven't even applied to grad school yet. And I feel that, yes, he is a fantastic person to look at and aspire to be. And I would encourage people to aspire to be this too, these subtler aspects of his leadership qualities. And for those of us who need this kind of support, it is out there. So I feel like this moment has the potential to be very important to a lot of people. And that is why I wanted to share it with you. And now I'll let him comment on it now that I've embarrassed him thoroughly.
So Lynette makes a good point there. It was a subtle moment, so subtle that I don't think I was aware of my response in any sort of diversity related thematic way or thoughtful way, really at all. What I value and what my mentors have always valued is performance, academic performance, interpersonal performance, if you will, genuineness. So I was simply reacting based on my knowledge of a faculty member who was quite competent. And I didn't really see that as being a diversity moment. But in listening to her recant that story, obviously that was a meaningful moment to more than one person. And so it has made me reflect and I think be more mindful of when sometimes a small action, a small comment may actually have a big impact on someone else. And I think trying to insert more of those teachable moments, if you will, into our daily activities is probably a very positive thing. So it ended up being a good experience for me as well. Although had somebody pointed that out in that moment, I probably would have completely poo-pooed it as just business as usual.
Next question. Given the changing demographics of our population and the complexity of ethnic racial identities, what do you think we should do next on a personal level and on a leadership level?
Well, there are plenty of things to do on the leadership level, but the question that I get asked most frequently by a wide range of healthcare professionals, especially in New Mexico, is where are all the competent bilingual neuropsychologists? And I know several, and they're very good, and I appreciate them very much, but there are certainly not enough to go round. And I think often people ask this question and want an easy answer, like there is a magical phrase they can include in a job listing that will attract these applicants or something like that. But I'm not sure there is an easy answer. I think to increase the number of competent bilingual neuropsychologists, there needs to be systemic change and thinking much earlier in the process than we have in the past. Just sitting here in New Mexico, I'm certain that there are many bilingual undergraduates, high school students, even junior high students who would make excellent neuropsychologists, but maybe they don't think they can get into college, or they don't think they can afford graduate school, or they don't know what a neuropsychologist is. And I think there has been some movement at the national level at reaching out to these students and opening up opportunities. And I think more of that is what I personally would love to be involved in, although it is just one of many things we could do. I think that would help us keep up with the growing diversity needs of our field. And on a personal level, I think continuing to talk about these issues and not feeling daunted or losing hope, and personally trying to set an example for trainees and junior colleagues. Representation absolutely matters. And I've found myself in the past in a position representing others by accident. I wasn't prepared for it. So my goal now is to become a good example for others. And one of my biggest regrets is that it took me about 2 years of working at UT Southwestern before I even began discussing these issues with Dr. Cullum. And it was nothing he was doing or suggesting. He has always been very open and approachable. It was all me. It was my past experience, being told I'm seeing things that aren't there. I should have had more faith in him. And even though things feel often very chaotic and scary now, and I'm feeling a little unsettled in my own identity, I know because at the end of the day, we are each other's greatest resource.
So that's a very good question, and it is a challenging time in our society right now. I think I would agree with a lot of what Lynette said too. We need people to step up and get involved. Go out of your comfort zone. Find those trusted individuals that can act as mentors for us. And most of us have, or many of us have, multiple mentors, and they may mentor you in one specific way or in one area of activity. But finding those professional role models, I think, is so important. And then for those role models, though, to be aware of the needs for diversity, and then reaching out and really encouraging the young students and the trainees in our field, discussing openly with them the opportunities that they may have as representatives of otherwise underrepresented groups, the impact that they may eventually have, that they can have on the field. But they also have to identify that that's something they want to do, that they want to make a difference. And I would encourage people to do as one of my mentors always said, keep working on your CV, your curriculum vitae, your resume. It's a reflection of your worth in academia. That applies in private practice as well. What are your credentials? Well, you want them to be the best they can be. You want to train with the best people you can find. But even after you're done with your formal training, there's still a lot of potential for mentoring in our field, finding those leaders and stepping up and indicating that you'd like to get involved and you want to help address the issues that confront us. And one of those big ones is addressing the diversity in the workforce in psychology.
Great, thank you. Next question, what advice would you give someone of a background similar to yours trying to navigate these complex issues in our field?
Right. I would say don't let anyone define your identity for you, and talk about it. Talk about your experience, talk about your background with peers and supervisors, talk with established neuropsychologists in the community, get involved in increasingly broad platforms from local to national committees and organizations. Just echoing a lot of what Dr. Cullum said as well, there are resources available to connect you with the neuropsych community and with various communities within the neuropsych community. And there may be times when you really feel like you're struggling, and at those times especially, talk to someone about it and don't give up. And I know that this is a bit general advice, and it's easier said than done. And I've recently had a sort of inverse experience to the one that we just talked about, where a trainee of mine who is a woman of color was relentlessly questioned by a patient's wife about her credentials, not in a way that was meant to gather information or clarify anything, but definitely in a way that was meant as an attack. This person actually said to my trainee, "What qualifies you to be in this room?" And by now I feel fairly established in my career, and I feel I can handle this kind of situation fairly well, much better than I did as a trainee. And to her credit, my trainee handled it better than I would have handled it as a trainee. But it really bothered me that it happened to her, and it makes me wonder what advice I could have given her prior to this that may have helped. And I'm not sure. I don't know what you can say to someone before the fact, other than know what neuropsychology means to you, know who you are, and find people you can discuss these issues with as they arise. There are many of us out here for you, I promise.
So I think that being sensitive, empathetic, understanding, as psychologists, we need to keep using our listening skills, but also our clinical and research or analytic skills. Stick with the data. And obviously, as in our guiding ethical principles, do what is right for our patients, our trainees, and colleagues. Neuropsychology is a really special field, and I would really encourage people to get involved. That's something I think Dr. Silva and I have said over and over. Get involved, step up, attend meetings, meet other people that are as excited about this field as you are. let them raise your level of excitement in the field. I will never forget an address that Aaron Bigler gave to the National Academy of Neuropsychology or the International Neuropsychological Society during his presidency. I forget which one it was. He started out by saying, "I love neuropsychology," and I thought those were some of the greatest words, because I feel the same today about my career in this field as I did when I was sitting in a graduate classroom. You need to be a good role model, be honest and genuine, but I can't underscore enough getting involved and going to meetings, interacting with others, hearing what others are doing. Don't just hide away in your office doing your Aaron Bigler likes to quote as well. And you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. And I think those words are, so important for all psychologists, actually all people, quite honestly. But neuropsychology is this really special group. We've got these annual meetings that bring us together, and these serve to inspire. You see the excitement on the trainees. Reach out to the new people. Make new friends. I started attending NAN and INS meetings when I was a second year in graduate school, and I think I've maybe missed one or two meetings ever. And it's just been so rewarding, and it's helped my career and stimulated me to get involved at national organizational levels, which has been rewarding and hopefully has helped to impact others as well. But we also need to be aware that we are role models, whether we like it or not, and we need to be mindful of that and utilize that in ways that do foster the next generation, because it's a great field and we still have a very bright future.
Conversation, and now I will hand it over to Michelle.
All right, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oops.
Thank you, Michelle.
It's not going to let me. Let's forward. All right, there we go. I figured it out. So now is the opportunity for us to engage in a dialogue regarding the conversation that we all had the opportunity to watch and listen to. So at this point, I will hand things over to Dr. McDonald to answer our first questions.
Thank you, Dr. Medor. We have our first question, and really want to thank Dr. Collum and Dr. Abram Silva for participating in the conversation. And I'll read the first question, and Dr. Abram Silva will respond. And the first question is, how have you dealt with issues with oppressive attitudes and microaggression?
Not gracefully is probably the best answer. Certainly in the beginning of my training and education and career, it was a little bit different, and I didn't expect a lot of oppressive attitudes and microaggression. And when I began to experience them, I didn't respond with as much grace as I wish that I could have. And it wasn't until just honestly in the last couple of years, when I feel more established in my career, that I feel more able to respond in a way that isn't just yelling and angry. I feel like I probably responded very defensively and tried to convince people, no, that's a terrible thing to say or a way to be, or don't you see this represents institutionalized racism, and people don't tend to respond particularly well to that kind of tactic. So I've worked very hard to try to become more established in my career, and now that I'm at this point, I feel that it's more my interacting with colleagues on a more even ground, so that it, like the story that I told in the video of what happened to my trainee, I did actually end up having a conversation with a Caucasian male colleague who thought that it was a good training opportunity for her on how to manage that situation, and not necessarily, he didn't really see what had happened to her. So I ended up having a conversation with him saying, here's her background. Don't you understand that this is different from yours? And yeah, I mean, it got, I don't want to say heated, but it's hard for me to have these conversations without getting sort of activated. So it maybe got a little bit activated, but I think it's easier when you're sort of established and kind of removed a little bit, and talking about, how you can help trainees and junior colleagues. That's been easier for me than when I was a trainee and a junior colleague. It was much harder for me to address these things then, and I guess I'm trying to be the advocate for them that I needed at the time. So I don't know what I would say to people on how exactly to address these things. It's very complicated, and you are in a vulnerable position if you're a trainee or a student. And I just would echo kind of what I said in the video, which is find someone you can talk to about it, and find advocates and sort of more senior staff or neuropsychologists or supervisors that you can talk to about it. And I think talking with each other helps. And as Dr. Medor said, after reflection, you may be able to respond better. Responding in the moment is always harder. I hope that I've answered that question.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron Silva. Dr. Medor, do you have a comment for that question as well?
Sure. So I think that when we are in differential power position, because being part of a marginalized community, you already have feelings and experiences that make you feel as if you are less than when you are not. Then you become a trainee, and you're clearly in a power differential because there are people who have more expertise than you do at this point, potentially in your career, or when you go to a new place. When we are unable to find ourselves able to discuss in the moment, it's okay. It's okay to go to somebody else. It's okay to reach out to someone else that to process what may or may not have occurred from your perspective and what that other person may have perceived before going back later. Sometimes in the moment, we can't say something because we can't do the risk-benefit analysis of the consequences of our behavior immediately. But we can reach out to someone to help process what's happened, to go through the risks and benefits of, does this person have the power over me that I think that they do? Can I take the risk by directly confronting what has occurred, or do I need to take a step back and find a different way around it, but still address it? Because not taking action is still making a decision. It's still a type of action. But when we have that double layer of inherent power differential, it makes it much more challenging. But there are people who have had that experience where they have been oppressed or they have been microaggressed from their supervisors, from their patients. Sadly, like, I can think of many examples in which I had to navigate that situation. And sometimes I said something in the moment, and other times I took a step back and might not have said something directly to the person who microaggressed against me, but went to someone else to process the situation. Yeah, I think that's what I would add.
Thank you both for your thoughtful responses. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening to please ask your questions on the question tab next to the video screen on YouTube, and comment any question, as well as, the points that Dr. Medor said at the beginning in terms of language. Dr. Monroe is an ally, and there's always things to learn from conversation. So please feel free to ask any question, and I'm going to read one more that we have. The question is, sometimes potential allies feel like it would be condescending to respond on behalf of a target of oppression instead of letting him or her stick up for herself or himself. Could you comment? And I'm going to open it to Dr. Abram Silva to comment.
I understand that sort of fear of, am I stepping on toes? Am I using my privilege in an inappropriate way? But I would say, just saying that, I don't want to speak for you, and I don't want to sound condescending, and let me know if I'm wrong, but I think this is an aggression, or I think this is, some sort of bias. I think it's fine to speak out, especially if you add that you don't want to sound condescending. Just being open and honest about that, I think it would be greatly appreciated. I would encourage people to speak out whenever they see any sort of issue of diversity, and the more allies that we have, the better it is. The more we talk about it, the better it can get. And so I think just acknowledging that, saying, I don't want to step on any toes, but I think that I'm seeing this thing and it can be done differently. Or, I think, do you want to rephrase that? However you want to communicate, I think it would be fantastic to speak out and do so boldly, I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Abram Silva. Any response, Dr. Medor?
I think that becomes an opportunity for education to that ally. And are we, and allies speak through action. Allies speak through helping minimize the occurrences of oppression to marginalized communities. And so that would be an opportunity to discuss with the ally that, due to their level of privilege, that others may unfortunately be more receptive to what they say. And that's a sad but potentially true occurrence. At the same time, as individuals who identify with marginalized communities, it can be hard to bear the burden of always being the one who's educating others. And so when we don't feel like we have the energy and we're reaching burnout, and we can't say, and this is, actually, you should speak up for us. You're not really stepping on my toes necessarily. And if you do say something that is inappropriate, I will help correct you. We can point them to resources so that they feel more knowledgeable when they take action. So it's that fine balance between providing allies with information so that they can help, and that they aren't stepping on our toes, and that they aren't doing us a favor by letting us advocate for ourselves, because sometimes their position of privilege is what is needed to help disseminate the information, and balancing that with our, social justice fatigue.
Thank you for your thoughtful responses. I see that we don't have any other questions. Are there any other comments from Dr. Abram Silva or from you that would like to share from the conversation?
Yeah, I'd like to say just, I guess, one more thing, which is just to reiterate that we are sort of our own best resources, and to talk to people that and find your community, and the more we talk about it and the more that we're there for each other, the better we are. So that's, I guess, what I would reiterate.
I just would like to thank everyone for their time taking the time out to listen to what we have to share and let everyone know that we're here for you, to help in the best that we can. And if we can't help, we will do our best to point you in the direction or connect you with someone who can. Representation matters, but having allies also matter. And there are things that we can do collectively to help further everyone and decrease um, this culture of injustice.
I want to echo Dr. Medor's comments, as well as refer everybody to our email website. We are a resource for everybody in the field of neuropsychology as well as outside. We're here as allies as well as mentors. We do have a mentoring program, and any questions can be directed on our Facebook page as well as with our contact information on the website. And I just want to be mindful of everybody's time since we're a little bit over 6 minutes. And thank everybody and wishing everybody a good evening.